Hello, my name is Lola Adebanji, and today I'm joined by Meirav Peled, who's the Director of Partnerships at Riskified. Meirav, thanks so much for being here today.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Meirav, can you tell us a bit about your background and your journey in payments? That'll be great to hear that for the audience.
Oh, sure. Well, payments is kind of a new market for me, if I can call the past 4 and some years new. But I've been around business development and partnership roles for over 20 years now, and went between different industries as I was growing my career. I started back in New York after my MBA and went into mobile, which was a big up and coming market at the time. I then made a shift into consumer products. After that, did cybersecurity and landed up in payments, which I have to say is one of the most interesting industries that I've been to. Because it's evolving so much. As you can hear, I'm a person that likes to change, likes to grow, likes to learn new things, and payments kind of gives me all of that in one industry.
Great. And that brought you to Riskified, I guess. And I guess speaking of Riskified, you're one of the leading providers of fraud and risk management solutions to e-commerce merchants. And I believe you're leveraging new technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning. Why are those technologies important in combating fraud, would you say? And how does Riskify leverage these technologies to create value for your merchants?
So I guess ML and AI are in the core of what we do. I joined Riskified 4 years ago, as I said, and still at that time, we were making decisions that were automated, but we had fraud analysts also reviewing transactions in the queue. And as we grew, we kind of went to a model that's all auto reviewed. Everything is done through our AI, through our machine learning models, and our extensive network of customers, where we use that network to elastically link between our different merchants, looking at the customers. And this whole technology not only allows us to help merchants grow their revenue without looking or needing to look at fraud, but it also helps them create new products, new services, go into new geographies. And this was key now with COVID. And we all know how COVID changed e-commerce.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things to COVID was new customers who came online. All of a sudden, the shift with new and what e-commerce merchants look at risky, right? So any merchant online that sees a new customer, to them it's the biggest risk. There's no history, there's no digital footprint, and all of a sudden merchants were flooded with new customers, and this is very scary and very risky. And a lot of times merchants who don't have these technologies behind them end up causing a lot of friction, stopping the transaction, causing them to sign in, causing them to look at SMS messages. And with the machine learning and AI that we have, looking at every transaction in real time, we're able to be behind the scenes. Customers don't even know that we are there, and we're able to make decisions on all these transactions, moving the good ones for the merchants, allowing them to capture them, and of course, taking out the fraudulent ones. So I think this is key to how we grew. We have, now I started, we were 100 people in the company, we're almost 600 today. And most of the, more than the half of the people, 60 some percent, are in our R&D, meaning these are data scientists, these are research analysts, they are building the new models, they're tweaking, they're looking at any anomalies behind the scenes, but we make everything in real time and everything is automated today. And of course, technology allowed us to get here.
Wow, that's a lot of growth in a short space of time. And you touched on e-commerce, and that's another area. Obviously, as you said, we've seen explosive growth with COVID. Have you seen a corresponding sort of explosive growth in fraud risk and fraud attempts as a result of this e-commerce growth that we're seeing? What sort of trends have you seen around fraud in the last couple of months? You know, you talk about new customers, which is very valid as being one of the resulting implications of that. Any other key fraud trends that have emerged over the last couple of months?
You know, fraud is fraud. It's I think it's one of the things, and I guess Riskified is in the right business because it will never go away. It could shift from place to place, and we've seen some of that over the past, 6-7 months. As we've seen a spike in new customers, we've also seen a spike, for example, in digital gift cards, right? So people now are buying, whether it's online presents for people they care about, for their loved ones, and sending them. And we know with this upcoming holiday season, we see a lot of that as well. Also, people are trying to help other people's via gift cards. So we see a lot of gift cards being sent to people who need more help, who need help with shopping. So again, a lot of digital goods, which are risky because the decision is a real-time decision. There's no time to second guess. So those are riskier transactions in the industry. And also we see now e-commerce being kind of a 24/7, right? Everybody's now online all over the world. Hours are shifting to when they're doing their shopping because everybody is home, and work-life balance is changing. People are now shopping at different hours. And all of a sudden, companies that had fraud centers from 9 to 5 looking at the different transactions, these are less relevant due to the different times that people are now shopping online. And we see a lot of nighttime shopping now. So again, we don't want to cause the friction. We don't want to stop a transaction just because somebody is buying at midnight and I don't have a fraud team. So we need to rely on the technology. And when I talk about this fraud, we see it in different industries. So industries that we used to think of as safe, like furniture in India, for example, is now all of a sudden risky. Or in Germany, we see fraud growing in electronics. So in different places around the world, we see fraud shift. So it's not going away, but it's shifting. And I think that's key to remember. Fraudsters, it's their business to be fraudsters. And unfortunately, we also see today that people who have lost their jobs, people who can't afford to buy legitimately, are also resulting to fraud. And we track on the dark web conversations of people that are saying, you know, we lost our job, we need to buy things, and we want to learn how to do this, you know, in a fraudulent way. So unfortunately, I don't think fraud is going to go away, but it is shifting, and we do see new trends to fraud.
So that's really challenging. As you say, you know, there are reasons obviously related to the pandemic, both in terms of the growth of e-commerce, but as you said, the kind of socioeconomic results as well. But I guess that kind of, you know, it shows us that fraudsters seem to always, for some one way or the other, try to be one step ahead, which is challenging for merchants, right? So how do merchants really stay on top of this evolution in fraud and how it evolves into new channels and new ways? You know, what are some of the ways that merchants can really stay on top of this or try to stay ahead of this?
Yeah. So I have to say, I think each one should focus on their core business, right? Our core business is fraud, but the merchant's core business is not fraud. So I think leveraging partners is key here. And as I said, technology and running this technology and our teams that are dedicated to it 24/7 are key. Because you need to be proactive. You can't be too reactive, that you're going to lose, of course, new customers who are key to you, but actually their value is when they return. And we see a lot of times that when a customer is declined falsely, so when there are rules in place and a merchant wants to react to chargebacks, for example. And I'll give a very simple example. If a merchant was hit with chargebacks from, let's say, a French IP with a Russian BIN on their credit card, they'll tend to be risk averse and they'll tend to decline transactions where they see the same pattern. And in, 9 out of 10 of the cases, this will be a false decline. So for every chargeback they stop, they have 9 unhappy customers. And we know that the value of a returning customer is higher in terms of basket. So that you want to have new customers actually evolve into a repeat customer and make sure that you have them for the lifetime, because the acquisition cost of this new customer is very high to you. So you want to keep them in the system. You need to make them happy. Also, if you bring friction into this transaction, again, a lot of people will drop off. They won't have the code. They won't be sure what to do. And they'll drop off. They'll leave the cart. And we see a high drop-off rate where 3DS is involved. We see high drop-off rates where all of a sudden you need to answer an email in order to get your transaction. And also sometimes when you don't get immediate results, there's friction in the transaction, people will just simply drop off, and it's not worth it to the merchant, especially as we see e-commerce is just going to grow. It's not going to go away. Even when the pandemic is over, hopefully soon, we still see that, from forecasts that e-commerce is here to stay, whether it's directly, whether it's an omni-channel. People are now used to buy online, pick up in store. It's something that, even I, as a customer, after the first lockdown was lifted, I found myself, again, shopping online, picking up in store. I found it much easier, much quicker, and I don't tend to change that even after COVID. And I think I'm not the only one, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Meirav, I want to pick up on the point you made around strong customer authentication, which is obviously very topical in Europe with the Payment Services Directive PSD2 and the stipulation around strong customer authentication, really trying to improve the security of online payments. And the point you made that many merchants are concerned around the implication of that on the flip side, which is on the consumer journey or the consumer checkout journey, and reducing and the friction, additional friction potentially that it introduces. Is there a happy balance that can be struck? Can merchants really look at balancing SCA compliance with minimizing checkout friction, and how can they do that? And is that something that Riskified is engaged in and working with merchants on?
So definitely, we do see that we are trying to help merchants, and of course it's not live yet, but we have been preparing our merchants for this over a year as deadlines have been pushed. And what we look at is, how do we advise them to look at exemptions, for example, right? So not every transaction needs to go into SCA. We're looking very specifically at two-legged, at the amount of the transaction. And what's key here for merchants is to know that if they keep their fraud levels very low and as an overall, then they can get exemptions for the transaction. So this is key for us to help our merchants keep their fraud rates low so they can use the exemptions. Of course, it's also something that, merchants can use later with their acquirers, for example, to show them that they have a low fraud rate. And as an acquirer, also, it's key to have merchants with low fraud rates, because you as an acquirer want to keep your fraud rates low, right? Mm-hmm. So I think as an ecosystem, once merchants are working with the right tools to limit their fraud, it helps the entire ecosystem go through strong customer authentication in less frictionless way, if I can call it that. So that's one key of it. The other thing, and I think I mentioned it before, is that I'm not a big believer that fraud is going away. fraud is going to shift. So if the European Union is now using SCA, fraudsters are going to look at other ways to continue on with their business, unfortunately. And what we've seen is even now that fraud has started to shift to account takeovers. So we see online also on the dark web, people offering to buy account credentials, right? And people selling account credentials, and they're sold for very cheaply, unfortunately. And what that means is that your accounts can be taken over. And now all of a sudden, the first thing that the fraudster will do is probably change your password, right? Maybe change the shipping address, phone number. So when now you're not going to be called, they're going to be called for delivery. And that's something that now the fraudster has control of your account, and they can use whether you have loyalty points there, whether they use a fake credit card, etc. So as I said, fraud is not going away, it's shifting, and merchants need to be aware of that, and merchants need to prepare for that. So for example, in our product suite, we've added another point to look at account login and make sure through our machine learning, through our AI, that the person who's logging in is the person that actually owns the account. And we do look at things like I mentioned. Did they automatically log in and change the password? That's something that we can see. Is the behavior different than the normal person that we used to see? And now changing the behavior, what do we want to do? And we work very closely with our merchants to say, hey, what do you want to do when we see the account takeover? Do you want to immediately stop the fraudster? Do you want to let them go through and stop them later? So we have a conversation with our merchants, and our solution is very tailored to their needs, to the way they want to handle their customer experience. But it's key that the real customer, the real account owner feels safe, right? Because if I feel somebody has taken over my account and the merchant didn't notify me, then I lose trust in the merchant, right? And I won't go there again. So again, it's also about the interaction between the merchants and the customer. So the customer experience is key.
And I guess to end, I'd like to pivot slightly to a completely different topic, if I may.
Sure.
So I'd love to get your perspectives on the future of work. Right, we've all, in some shape or form, been working remotely for numerous months now, and as you mentioned, unfortunately, you're back in your second lockdown. So I'm just trying to understand or get your perspectives on how would you hope, or how would you like to see the future of work evolve, and what learnings from the last 6 months or so should we be taking forward to help us reimagine the future of work in a better way?
Yeah, so I guess I'm lucky as I work in partnerships. So, I used to love meeting my partners in person. And Lola, we did that a couple of times
Yeah.
in the past. And it gives a different, I guess, meaning to a partnership relation. But I think we managed, and it took some time, I have to say, even for me, all of a sudden I'm locked down. I don't have the accessibility to meet everyone face to face, and now we're having this conversation, which is, how we evolved, I think, into learning more, being able to utilize more of the relationships that we can, because then we can see more of the markets. We can do more of the learnings that we used to when we went to conferences. But it also gave me a perspective on, I have to say, work-life balance. That also took me a while. All of a sudden, you're working from your bedroom. So what's the problem of being online at any time and answering, anyone who's in whatever time zone? And I work with, people from Japan all the way to the West Coast. So you can imagine I can be online 24/7 talking to someone. And my kids used to come in the room and, as I was typing on my computer, and they'd say, start talking to me. And I'd say, I'm working. And they'll look at me and say, oh, Mom, you're not talking to anyone, so you're not working. So yes, it's been a shift, and we learned to do more things interactively. I learned to grow plants, which I never used to before. So I think we are finding these fine lines between work and life between being able to sit down for lunch with my children, which I have to admit I haven't done in years, and it's a lot of fun. But then being able to go back to work, so this flexibility I feel is an amazing opportunity. But it's also it's a learning curve, and it's something that we need to make sure we think about actively, because it's easy to kind of shift into working all the time. I do hope we get to see each other more, but I am glad that we do have these interactions. We have to work to get them, and I think that's part of what we need to do. We can't stop interacting just because we are in a lockdown. It's a matter of finding the right way to do it, and the normal of now, as we spoke about, it's finding the balance of what's normal to us now and making sure we can adapt to the next normal now.
Absolutely. Meirav, thank you so much. I always love connecting with you because I learned so much about what's happening from a risk management standpoint, what's happening in the fraud space, but even more generally, as you said, in terms of, the aspect around the normal of now and how do we think about balance, flexibility, and really consciously making those connections on a day-to-day basis. So thank you so much for joining us today and for all your insights.
Thank you.
And to our audience listening in, thank you very much for your time as well. Thanks for joining us.